The planet Novus was a place of harsh contrasts. Its sprawling cities glistened with advanced technology, towers of metal and glass stretching towards the twin suns. Yet, its outskirts were wild, untamed forests brimming with bioluminescent flora and fauna that thrived in the perpetual twilight. Somewhere deep in those forests lived Kayla, a being that defied the definitions of both man and nature. Legends of Kayla had spread through Novus for decades. Some claimed she was the remnant of an ancient alien race that once ruled the planet, cursed to wander the wilderness for eternity. Others whispered she was a failed experiment of the enigmatic corporeal laboratories, their genetic manipulation gone horribly wrong. The most imaginative tales painted her as a goddess, a guardian of secrets too powerful for mortal minds. Whatever the truth, the consensus among the people of Novus was clear: Kayla was a monster, and to cross her path was to invite death or madness. The forest she inhabited was known as the Veiled Expanse. Few dared to venture into its depths, for it was said the forest itself protected Kayla, shifting its paths and summoning storms to drive intruders away. Despite the risks, Varen the young, unorthodox researcher from the capital city of Axion felt an undeniable pull toward her. Varen was no stranger to skepticism. His peers at the Xenoscience Academy scoffed at his fixation on the myths of Novus, dismissing his work as fanciful distractions from more practical studies. But Varen saw something they could not: the patterns in the myths, the fragments of truth hidden in the fabric of legend. He believed Kayla was real, and more importantly, that she was the key to understanding the mysterious radiation that permeated Novus' atmosphere, a phenomenon that had stunted technological advancement for centuries. Equipped with a lightweight exosuit and armed only with a data pad, Varen entered the Veiled Expanse at dawn. The forest was unlike anything he had imagined. Trees with trunks like twisted glass stretched skyward, their branches glowing faintly with an otherworldly blue light. Strange flowers opened and closed like breathing lungs, exhaling bursts of glittering spores that hung in the air like stardust. It was both beautiful and alien, a world that seemed alive and aware. The deeper he went, the more the forest seemed to resist him. Pathways he had marked on his map disappeared as if erased, and the hum of the wind carried a low, resonant sound that felt almost like a warning. The bioluminescent flora dimmed as he passed, plunging him into an oppressive gloom. Yet Varen pressed on, his determination outweighing his unease. Hours passed before he reached the heart of the forest, a clearing bathed in the eerie light of the planet's twin moons. There, she stood. Kayla was unlike anything he had prepared for. Her form shimmered, not in a static glow but in dynamic patterns that seemed to ripple across her body like living constellations. Her eyes, large and luminescent, fixed on him with an intensity that pinned him in place. She stood tall, her elongated limbs both graceful and intimidating, and her hair, or what resembled it, moved softly as though caught in an invisible current. Varen took a cautious step forward, his boots crunching softly on the strange, spongy ground. Kayla's gaze sharpened, and her patterns shifted to a deep crimson. He stopped, raising his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. "I mean you no harm," he said, his voice trembling despite his attempt to sound calm. "I just want to talk." Kayla tilted her head, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the faint hum of the forest. Then she spoke not in words, but in sound. A low, melodic tone emerged from her, resonating through the clearing. It was as if the forest itself sang through her, a language Varen could not begin to comprehend. He held his ground, meeting her gaze with unwavering resolve. "I want to understand you," he said softly. "Please." Kayla's eyes narrowed, and her patterns shifted again, this time to a flickering silver. It was not a gesture of acceptance, but neither was it outright rejection. In that moment, Varen felt a sliver of hope. Whatever she was, whatever the truth of her existence, she had acknowledged him. It was a start. As the moons cast their light over the clearing, Varen realized he was standing at the threshold of discovery. But he also knew that this encounter was just the beginning, a fragile truce in a world bound by fear and mystery. The veiled expanse lived up to its name. As Viren pressed deeper into the forest, the terrain grew stranger, more alien. The trees bent and twisted as though resisting his intrusion, their glowing branches forming jagged arches above his head. The bioluminescent plants that had first captivated him now seemed to watch him, their flickering lights shifting in response to his movements. It was as if the forest itself had a will of its own. Kayla had disappeared into the shadows after their first encounter, leaving him with only the faint memory of her melodic tone and the swirling silver patterns across her body. Yet, despite her absence, he felt her presence everywhere, a quiet hum in the air, a sense of being observed from every angle. Viren set up a temporary camp in a small grove, lighting a portable thermal lamp that cast a warm, artificial glow. The light felt intrusive in this natural wonderland, and the surrounding plants recoiled slightly as if in protest. Viren couldn't shake the feeling that he was trespassing, but his curiosity burned brighter than his fear. Opening his data pad, he began logging his observations. The forest's plants seemed to exhibit a rudimentary form of sentience, reacting to light, sound, and even his movements. The air was thick with trace amounts of the mysterious radiation that permeated Nova's atmosphere, a factor he suspected was key to Kayla's unique physiology. As he worked, a low rustling sound echoed through the grove. Viren froze, his fingers hovering over the screen. Slowly, he turned toward the sound, his heart pounding. A pair of glowing eyes stared back at him from the darkness. "Kayla," he whispered, though he wasn't certain if it was her. The figure stepped closer, and the light revealed her unmistakable form. Kayla stood at the edge of the grove, her gaze cautious but less hostile than before. The silver patterns on her skin pulsed faintly, as if mirroring her heartbeat. Viren realized she was studying him just as intently as he had studied her. "I didn't think you'd come back," he said, his voice soft, almost reverent. Kayla didn't respond in words. Instead, she reached out with a hand, her elongated fingers tracing the air as if feeling the space between them. Her movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, and Viren remained still, not wanting to frighten her. "I want to learn about you," he said, holding up his data pad to show her. "About this forest. About why you're here." Kayla tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. For a moment, Viren thought she might turn and disappear again, but then she stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the data pad, and a soft glow emanated from her touch. The screen flickered, the data scrambled and rearranged into symbols Viren didn't recognize. "You can understand this?" he asked, astonished. Kayla's patterns shifted to a soft green, a color Viren instinctively interpreted as affirmation. She pointed toward the pad, then gestured toward the forest, her movements fluid and precise. Viren understood she was trying to communicate, though her meaning was still opaque. He felt a pang of frustration at the language barrier, but also a surge of determination. "Are you connected to this forest?" he asked tentatively. Kayla's patterns rippled with a mix of colors: gold, blue, and silver. Viren couldn't decipher their meaning, but the display was mesmerizing. She stepped back, gesturing for him to follow. Viren hesitated. He had come this far, but the thought of venturing deeper into the veiled expanse, led by a being he barely understood, sent a chill down his spine. Yet, his desire for answers outweighed his fear. He grabbed his gear and followed her into the shadows. The journey was surreal. Kayla moved with an effortless grace, her steps making no sound as she led Viren through the twisting paths of the forest. The floor seemed to part for her, their glowing branches forming a corridor that closed again once they passed. The forest was alive with strange sounds: chirps, hums, and low, resonant tones that seemed to originate from the trees themselves. At last, they reached a clearing unlike any Viren had seen before. In the center stood an enormous tree, its trunk so wide it seemed to support the sky itself. Its bark shimmered with the same patterns as Kayla's skin, and its branches stretched upward like the fingers of a colossal hand. The ground around it was covered in a soft, glowing moss that pulsed gently, like the beating of a heart. Kayla stopped and turned to face him. Her patterns shifted to a deep, vibrant blue, and she gestured toward the tree. Varen approached cautiously, feeling an almost magnetic pull toward the massive structure. As he reached out to touch its bark, a sudden surge of energy coursed through him. Images flooded his mind, visions of a thriving civilization, of beings like Kayla working in harmony with the forest, and then of destruction, fire, and chaos. He staggered back, gasping. What was that? Kayla's patterns turned a somber gray. She gestured toward the tree again, and this time Varen understood. The forest, the radiation, Kayla herself, they were all remnants of something ancient, something that had been broken. The veiled expanse wasn't just her home, it was a living memory, a fragment of a forgotten past. Varen looked at Kayla, his fear replaced by a profound sense of awe. "You're not a monster," he said, his voice trembling. "You're a guardian." Kayla's patterns glowed softly in response, a faint glimmer of green. It was the closest thing to a smile he'd seen. The days that followed were a delicate dance of discovery and trust. Varen and Kayla returned to the clearing with the massive, shimmering tree each day, their interactions growing more complex. The tree, which Varen had begun to call the heart of the forest, seemed to act as a conduit for their communication. Every time he touched its bark, waves of images and emotions flowed through him, echoes of Kayla's memories, the history of her people, and the forest's ancient purpose. Through these exchanges, Varen began piecing together the truth. Kayla was not a random anomaly, but the last of a once thriving race native to Novus. Her people, known as the Luminari, had been deeply connected to the planet's unique radiation, their bodies evolved to harmonize with it. They had created the Veiled Expanse as both a sanctuary and a living archive, preserving their knowledge and culture within its luminous ecosystem. But the arrival of humans had disrupted this balance. Driven by ambition and greed, the settlers had mined the planet's resources, destabilizing the delicate harmony that sustained the Luminari. Kayla had survived the collapse of her civilization, merging with the forest in a desperate act of self-preservation. Her glowing patterns were not just a reflection of her emotions, but a language, a way of interfacing with the living archive of her world. Despite these revelations, Kayla remained wary of Varen. Her memories were haunted by betrayal and destruction, and she had little reason to trust a human. Yet, Varen's persistence, his curiosity, and his refusal to harm the forest slowly began to erode her defenses. One twilight, as the twin moons rose above the Veiled Expanse, Varen decided to take a bold step. He had spent hours analyzing the shifting patterns on Kayla's skin, cross-referencing them with the data collected from the tree. While he couldn't decipher her entire language, he believed he had identified a few basic concepts: peace, trust, and knowledge. "I want to try something," Varen said, standing in the clearing. He raised his hands slowly, palms open, mimicking a gesture he had seen Kayla use when addressing the heart of the forest. Kayla watched him, her patterns flickering with a mixture of gold and crimson, curiosity tinged with caution. She stepped closer, her movements fluid and soundless, her luminous eyes locked on his. Varen took a deep breath and extended his hand toward her. "I'm not here to harm you," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "I want to understand." Kayla hesitated, her patterns shifting rapidly. Crimson gave way to blue, then green, then silver. Finally, she extended her own hand, her elongated fingers trembling slightly. As their hands touched, the world seemed to stop. A surge of energy coursed through Varen, more powerful than anything he had felt before. His vision blurred, and suddenly, he was no longer in the clearing. He stood in a vast, ethereal landscape, the air alive with shimmering lights and floating symbols. Kayla was there too, her form more vivid and radiant than ever, her patterns glowing with a vibrant gold that radiated warmth and clarity. The images came in waves. He saw the Luminari thriving in harmony with the forest, their laughter and songs resonating through the heart of the forest. He saw the arrival of human settlers, their machines scarring the land, their presence poisoning the delicate balance. He saw Kayla standing amidst the ruins of her people, her luminous patterns flickering with grief as she merged with the forest, becoming its guardian. Through it all, Varen felt her emotions, her sorrow, her anger, her hope. He realized the depth of her isolation, the centuries spent alone, watching the forest decay around her. And he felt her cautious hope now, a fragile thread sparked by his presence. When the vision ended, Varen found himself back in the clearing, his hand still clasped in Kayla's. Tears streamed down his face, though he hadn't realized he was crying. Kayla's patterns glowed softly with green and silver, her gaze steady and searching. "I'm sorry," Varen said, his voice breaking, "for what we've done to your people, to this planet. But I promise, I'll do everything I can to help you, to protect this forest." Kayla studied him for a moment longer, then released his hand. Her patterns shifted to a warm gold, and Varen knew he had taken the first step toward earning her trust. Over the next few days, their bond deepened. Kayla began guiding Varen to hidden places within the veiled expanse, ancient structures overgrown with luminous vines, pools of water that shimmered with the essence of her people's knowledge. Each discovery brought new insights into the Luminaries' culture and their connection to the forest. But the harmony was fragile. Varen knew it was only a matter of time before others from the capital took notice of his expedition. If they learned of Kayla and the secrets of the veiled expanse, they would see only resources to exploit, not a history to preserve. He had to find a way to protect her and the forest, to show the people of Novus that Kayla was not a monster but a living testament to the planet's past and a guardian of its future. One evening, as they sat by the heart of the forest, Varen turned to Kayla. "I need to tell your story," he said, "to make them understand what's at stake. But I can't do it alone. Will you help me?" Kayla's patterns flickered thoughtfully. Then, slowly, they shifted to a brilliant green. It was the closest thing to a yes he could hope for. The fragile alliance between Varen and Kayla had blossomed into a partnership, but Varen knew the real challenge lay ahead. He needed to convince the people of Novus that Kayla and the Veiled Expanse were not threats to be eradicated or resources to be exploited. They were treasures to be understood and protected. Yet, his heart weighed heavy with the knowledge that centuries of fear and greed would not be undone with words alone. The first encounter, the turning point, came sooner than Varen expected. On the third week of his expedition, the hum of low-flying drones shattered the serene stillness of the forest. Varen recognized them immediately, reconnaissance units sent by Corporeal Laboratories, the same organization rumored to have conducted experiments in the Veiled Expanse centuries ago. The forest reacted violently. Bioluminescent trees darkened, and the wind carried an eerie, mournful sound, as if the forest itself were lamenting the intrusion. Kayla appeared beside him in an instant, her glowing patterns a kaleidoscope of crimson and silver, reflecting anger and fear. Varen held up his hands to calm her. "Let me handle this," he said, his voice firm but reassuring. The drones hovered in a clearing near the heart of the forest, their mechanical eyes scanning the ancient tree and the surrounding flora. Moments later, a team of armed researchers emerged, their weapons trained on the shadows. "Identify yourself," a voice barked, amplified through a drone speaker. It was Dr. Alice Torin, a high-ranking scientist from Corporeal Laboratories. Varen recognized her from his days at the Xenoscience Academy, a brilliant mind, but one with a reputation for ruthlessness. Varen stepped into the clearing, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Dr. Torin, it's me, Varen. I'm here on an independent expedition." Torin's eyes narrowed as she stepped forward, her attention flicking between him and the towering heart of the forest. "This area is off-limits, Varen. What exactly are you doing here?" "I'm documenting the history of this forest," Varen replied. "And its guardian." At the word guardian, Torin's gaze hardened. "You've seen it?" she asked, her tone laced with suspicion. "I've done more than see it," Varen said. "I've communicated with her. She's not a monster, Alice. She's a survivor. A guardian of knowledge that could benefit all of Novus if we're willing to learn from her." Torin's expression flickered between skepticism and interest. But the soldiers behind her remained on edge, their weapons trained on the surrounding trees. The forest seemed to bristle with tension, the air thick with an unspoken warning. Kayla's decision as the standoff continued. Kayla stepped into the clearing. Her appearance was met with gasps and raised weapons. Her patterns shimmered with a controlled, neutral silver as she stood tall and calm, her glowing eyes meeting Torin's. "Stand down!" Varen shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. "She's not a threat." Torin raised a hand, signaling her team to hold fire, though they kept their weapons ready. "It's magnificent," she murmured, her eyes scanning Kayla's shifting patterns. "But we can't assume it's harmless." "She's not it," Varen said firmly. "Her name is Kayla. She's intelligent, and she's been protecting this forest for centuries. If you harm her, you'll destroy everything this planet has to teach us." Kayla took a step forward, raising her hand slowly. The patterns on her skin shifted to green, then gold, conveying trust and hope. She pointed toward the heart of the forest, then back at Torin, her movements deliberate and measured. The tree responded to her gesture, its bark glowing with an iridescent light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Varen translated as best he could. "She's offering to share her knowledge, but only if we stop treating her and this forest as threats." Torin hesitated, her eyes darting between Kayla and the heart of the forest. "Knowledge," she said, her voice tinged with longing. "Do you realize what this could mean for our understanding of the radiation? Of the planet itself?" "It means nothing if we exploit it," Varen said sharply. "If we want her trust, we have to prove we're worthy of it." A new path. The tense meeting marked the beginning of a fragile alliance. Over the next few weeks, Varen and Kayla worked closely with Torin's team to establish a safe zone within the veiled expanse. Kayla's trust was slow to build, but her willingness to communicate through the heart of the forest allowed for a delicate exchange of ideas. Word of the discovery spread quickly. Scholars, scientists, and diplomats from across Novus descended upon the forest, eager to learn from the living archive Kayla protected. Yet, Varen remained cautious. He knew how quickly curiosity could turn to exploitation, and he made it his mission to ensure Kayla's autonomy and the forest's preservation. Kayla, too, adapted. Her patterns grew more vibrant as she interacted with the newcomers, her melodic tones resonating with a blend of curiosity and cautious hope. She was no longer the solitary guardian of a forgotten past, she had become a bridge between her world and theirs. A new dawn. Months later, Varen stood with Kayla at the base of the heart of the forest, watching as a group of children from the capital explored the glowing grove under her watchful eye. The children laughed and marveled at the bioluminescent plants, their wonder untainted by fear. "You've changed everything," Varen said, glancing at Kayla. "You've given us a chance to rebuild not just with technology, but with understanding." Kayla's patterns shimmered gold and green, a soft hum emanating from her as she placed a hand on the heart of the forest. The tree responded with a radiant glow, its light spilling across the clearing like a sunrise. Varen smiled. "You're not a monster, Kayla. You never were. You're the future of this planet." Kayla turned to him, her eyes glowing softly. In her own way, she smiled too. The dawn of a new age had begun, a future forged by trust, empathy, and the courage of one man who dared to reach out to what others feared. Together, they had proven that even the deepest divides could be bridged with understanding. And so, under the twin suns of Novus, a monster became a guardian, and a forgotten world found its voice once more.